Hello guys and welcome back to the Expensive Coins History channel. There are moments in a man's life when he realizes that the most overlooked things sitting right in front of him were actually the most valuable all along. Most men spend decades building something, a career, a family, a reputation, and somewhere along the way, they learn that real value is almost never found in the obvious places. It hides, it waits, it sits quietly in a jar on a kitchen counter, or rattles around in the bottom of a coat pocket, or gets tossed into a drawer that hasn't been opened in years. And one day, if you're paying attention, if you're the kind of man who actually slows down long enough to look at what's in his hands, you realize you've been holding something extraordinary without ever knowing it. That's what this is about today. Not a get-rich-quick scheme. Not some breathless nonsense about hidden treasures buried in caves. This is about something far more grounded, far more real, and far more relevant to the kind of man who's been around long enough to know that knowledge is the sharpest tool anyone can carry. This is about 5 copper coins, 5 Lincoln pennies, 5 tiny pieces of American history that are currently selling at auction for prices that would make most people's jaws drop straight to the floor. And the first one we're going to talk about is the 1975 D. Lincoln Memorial Cent. Now, before you roll your eyes or reach for the remote, stay with me here. Because what you're about to hear isn't just about coins. It's about understanding value, understanding rarity, understanding why certain things that the world completely ignores suddenly become worth more than most people make in a year. And if you've ever held one of these pennies without knowing what it was, the story I'm about to tell you is going to stick with you for a very long time. The year is 1975. Gerald Ford is in the White House. The Vietnam War has just ended. Bruce Springsteen releases Born to Run. Men across America are working hard, raising families, paying bills, and dropping pennies into jars without a second thought. The Denver Mint, that's what the D means, the mint mark stamped on the front of the coin just below the date, is producing hundreds of millions of Lincoln cents that year. Hundreds of millions. The machinery is running, the copper blanks are being fed through the presses, and coins are pouring out by the billions across both the Denver and Philadelphia facilities. And that's exactly why most 1975 D pennies are worth exactly 1 cent. Because when something is made in that kind of volume, when it's that common, the market has no reason to assign it any special value. Supply and demand, it's the most fundamental principle in economics, and it applies just as powerfully to coins as it does to oil, real estate, or a limited edition truck. When supply is massive and demand is modest, value stays flat. That's the rule. But rules, as every man over 50 knows, have exceptions. And the exceptions are where fortunes are made. The 1975 D pennies that command serious money, real money, the kind of money that changes the conversation at a family dinner table, are the ones that fell outside the standard production process. The ones that came out wrong in ways that the mint inspectors missed. The ones that carry what the numismatic world calls errors or varieties. Now, numismatics is just the formal word for coin collecting, but don't let the fancy term fool you. This is not a hobby for soft men in velvet-lined rooms. This is a pursuit that rewards sharp eyes, patient research, and the kind of disciplined attention to detail that separates men who know things from men who just think they do. So what makes a 1975 D penny extraordinary? What takes it from face value to a figure that would cover a decent used truck, a year's worth of mortgage payments, or a once-in-a-lifetime hunting or fishing trip? It comes down to a handful of specific characteristics that you need to know how to look for. The first and perhaps most dramatic is the double die obverse. The obverse is the front of the coin, Lincoln's side. A double die error occurs during the manufacturing of the die itself, which is the tool used to stamp the design into the coin. If the die gets slightly misaligned during its own creation process, the resulting coins will show a doubling effect on the design elements: the date, the lettering, Lincoln's features. Under proper magnification, you'll see 2 distinct impressions slightly offset from each other. Not a blur, not a smear, actual defined doubling. On a genuine double die 1975 D, that doubling shows up most dramatically in the words "Liberty" and "I in God We Trust" on the obverse. When you see it clearly, it's unmistakable. Then there's the off-center strike. This happens when the blank coin, called a planchet, isn't sitting perfectly centered under the die when the press comes down. The result is a coin where the design is pushed to one side, and a crescent-shaped area of blank metal is visible on the opposite side. The value of an off-center strike depends on how far off-center it is and whether the date is still visible. A coin that's 15 to 20% off-center with a fully readable date is already a standout. Push that to 40 or 50% off-center, date still visible and sharp, and you have something that serious collectors will compete hard to own. There's also the matter of die caps and brockages, major planchet errors, coins struck on the wrong metal. There are entire categories of manufacturing mistakes that the Denver Mint's quality control missed back in 1975, and any one of them can transform an ordinary penny into a coin worth serious study and serious money. But here's what separates the men who actually find and capitalize on these coins from the men who simply read about them. Condition. In the coin world, condition is graded on a scale developed by a professional grading service, and the highest grades, MS65, MS66, MS67, all the way up, represent coins that have survived decades without wear, without cleaning, without contact damage, without the kind of handling that most coins experience just by existing in the world. A 1975 D Lincoln cent with a significant error in high mint state condition is exceptionally rare. Most error coins got spent. Most high-grade coins didn't have errors. The overlap, the coin that is both a dramatic error and in pristine preserved condition, that's the holy grail. That's what drives prices into the tens of thousands. Now here is what the men watching this need to understand, because this is the practical part, the part that actually matters if you're going to do something with this information rather than just find it interesting. These coins are still out there. They're in collections that haven't been fully examined. They're in estates left by fathers and grandfathers who saved pennies for decades without knowing the specific details of what made certain ones extraordinary. They're in rolls of old cents that haven't been opened. They're in those mixed bags of coins that show up at estate sales, at flea markets, at the bottom of dresser drawers in houses that are being cleared out after someone passes. The man who finds one of these isn't the man who got lucky. He's the man who learned what to look for, who took the time to understand the system, and who had the patience to keep looking when other people stopped. That's not luck. That's preparation meeting opportunity, which is the only definition of luck worth taking seriously. So here's what you do. You go through your pennies. You separate out the ones from the 1970s. You get yourself a good loupe, a 10-power magnifying glass is the standard entry point, and you examine the date, the lettering, the centering, the surface. You look for doubling. You look for anything that seems off, anything that doesn't match the clean, centered, single impression look of a standard coin. You're not looking for something subtle. The errors that create real value are visible. They're obvious once you know what obvious looks like. And if you find something that makes you stop and look twice, you don't clean it, you don't polish it, you don't hand it to someone who isn't qualified to evaluate it. You protect it. You put it in a soft flip or a coin holder, and you get it to a professional numismatist or submit it to a grading service. Because the moment you clean a coin, you destroy the surface, and with it, the grade, and with the grade, the value. Men who've learned that lesson the hard way will tell you, leave it alone until it's been properly evaluated. The 1975 D Lincoln penny. A coin that most people have dropped into a parking meter without a second glance. A coin that exists in the millions. But in the right condition, with the right error, with the right documentation behind it, this coin has sold for $61,000. $61,000. For a penny. That's not a typo. That's not an exaggeration for effect. That's a documented auction result. And that number matters. We'll come back to it at the end of this video with all 5 coins lined up together, because when you see all 5 figures side by side, the picture becomes something genuinely remarkable. But right now, we're moving to the second coin, and the story behind it is just as powerful. There's a certain kind of man who understands that the world doesn't reward the loudest voice in the room. It rewards the most prepared mind. It rewards the man who did his homework when everyone else was distracted. It rewards the man who understood something deeply before the crowd figured out it was worth understanding at all. That man doesn't chase trends. He doesn't follow what's popular. He studies what's real, what's documented, what's verifiable. And then he acts on that knowledge with the kind of quiet confidence that only comes from actually knowing what you're talking about. If you're the kind of man who recognizes that description, then what I'm about to tell you about the 1974 Lincoln cent is going to land exactly the way it's supposed to. Because the 1974 penny has a story behind it that goes far deeper than most people realize. It's not just a story about an old coin sitting in someone's drawer. It's a story about a moment in American manufacturing history when the United States government itself was wrestling with one of the most fundamental questions in currency production: what should a penny actually be made of? And the answer to that question, the experimentation that surrounded it, the mistakes that were made, and the coins that slipped through the cracks as a result, that's what makes the 1974 Lincoln cent one of the most fascinating and financially significant small coins in modern American numismatic history. To understand why, you need to go back to the early 1970s and understand what was happening with copper. The penny at that time was made of a composition that was 95% copper and 5% zinc. That had been the standard for decades. But by the early 70s, the global price of copper was climbing. Industrial demand was increasing. The cost of producing a 1-cent coin was creeping uncomfortably close to the face value of the coin itself, and in some projections it threatened to exceed it entirely. The government was paying nearly as much to make a penny as the penny was worth. That's the kind of economic absurdity that forces action, and the United States Mint began seriously exploring alternatives. They experimented. They tested different metal compositions. They looked at aluminum. They produced test strikes, experimental coins, in aluminum during 1974 to evaluate whether the material was a viable alternative for mass penny production. And this is where the story takes a turn that has fascinated collectors and historians for decades. A small number of those 1974 aluminum pennies were distributed to members of Congress for examination and consideration as part of the legislative review process. The plan was for every single one of those coins to be returned and destroyed. Official policy was clear. These were not authorized coins, they were experimental strikes, and they were not to enter circulation. Most of them were returned. Most of them were destroyed. But not all of them. A tiny number of 1974 aluminum Lincoln cents are believed to have survived. And the ones that have surfaced, the ones that can be documented, authenticated, and legally owned, represent some of the most extraordinary finds in modern American coin collecting. These are coins that exist at the absolute intersection of historical significance, extreme rarity, and the kind of human story that makes grown men stop everything they're doing and pay very close attention. Now, the standard 1974 Lincoln cent, the copper version produced for circulation, came out of both the Philadelphia and Denver mints in massive quantities. Like the 1975 D we just discussed, the sheer volume of production means that the average 1974 penny in average condition is worth exactly what it says on the face. 1 cent. But the moment you introduce the same variables we talked about, errors, varieties, exceptional preservation, the kind of mint state condition that tells you this coin was never spent, never carried, never dropped into a jar with 1,000 other coins, the value equation changes completely. The 1974 Lincoln cent with a double die obverse is among the most sought-after varieties from that era. The doubling on these coins, when present in strong form, is visible on the lettering and date with a 10-power loop, the same tool any serious collector keeps within reach at all times. The letters in Liberty show the separation. The numbers in the date show two distinct impressions. And what makes these particularly exciting for the men who find them is that they are exactly the kind of coin that could be sitting in an old collection right now, unexamined, undervalued, waiting for someone with the right knowledge and the right tools to recognize what they're looking at. But beyond errors and varieties, there's another dimension to the 1974 penny's value that sophisticated collectors understand deeply, and that's the concept of registry quality. The major grading services, organizations like PCGS and NGC, maintain population reports that track how many examples of any given coin have been graded at each grade level. When a coin is graded MS67 red, meaning it's in exceptional mint state condition with full original red copper luster, the color a penny has when it's brand new and hasn't been exposed to air and handling, and the population report shows that only 2 or 3 examples exist at that grade with none graded higher, that coin becomes what collectors call a condition rarity. It's not rare because few were made. It's rare because virtually none survived in that condition. And condition rarities command condition rarity prices. This is a concept that men who've spent time in business understand intuitively. It's the same reason a truck that's been maintained perfectly and has original paint and low miles sells for dramatically more than an identical model that's been used hard. The object might be the same. The condition tells an entirely different story. And in the coin market, that story is worth real money. Here's something else the experienced man needs to understand about the 1974 penny specifically: the importance of the mint mark, or in this case, the potential absence of one. Coins produced at the Philadelphia Mint during this era carried no mint mark. The Denver Mint used the D. The San Francisco Mint, which primarily produced proof coins for collectors, used the S. A 1974 proof penny from San Francisco in perfect condition, with deep cameo contrast, meaning the raised design elements are frosted and brilliant while the fields, the flat background areas, are mirror-like, is a genuinely beautiful object and a genuinely valuable one when graded at the top of the proof scale. But the conversation around 1974 that draws the most serious attention, that brings the most experienced dealers and the most serious collectors to the table, always comes back to those aluminum experimental strikes. Because here is what the men watching this need to sit with for a moment. These coins exist. They are real. They have been documented. One was found in the estate of a congressman's aide. Others are believed to be in private hands. The question of whether a previously unknown example might surface in an old collection, in the contents of an estate, in a family's accumulated belongings from the 1970s, that question has never been fully answered. The door is not closed. It is not even fully shut. That's not speculation for entertainment. That's the documented historical record speaking directly to the possibility that somewhere, right now, there is a man who has an aluminum 1974 penny and doesn't know it. And if you think that scenario sounds far-fetched, consider this: most of the great numismatic discoveries of the last 50 years were made not by professional treasure hunters, but by ordinary people who happened to look at something they'd owned for years and decided, for the first time, to really examine it. The practical lesson in all of this is straightforward, and it's the same lesson that every area of life teaches the man who's been paying attention long enough to learn it. You don't find what you're not looking for. The man who never examines his coins never finds the extraordinary one. The man who assumes everything he owns is ordinary never discovers that he's been wrong. But the man who slows down, who takes the time to understand what he's looking at, who applies the same discipline to this that he'd apply to any other area where knowledge creates advantage, that man changes his outcome. For the 1974 Lincoln cent, that changed outcome could mean holding something worth tens of thousands of dollars. The standard copper examples with dramatic errors in high grade have sold for figures that reflect their genuine rarity. The aluminum strikes, when legally obtained and properly documented, represent a different category of value entirely. One that operates above the normal market because the coins themselves operate above the normal framework of what a penny can be. And the figure we're building toward, the number that represents what a top-tier 1974 Lincoln cent has commanded at documented auction, is a number that belongs in the same conversation as a good used car, a year of college tuition, or a significant home improvement project. $60,000. That's what the 1974 penny has reached. $60,000 for a coin that most people would drop into a charity jar at a gas station counter without breaking stride. We'll put that number in full context at the end of this video, lined up alongside all 5 coins, and the picture it creates is something you will not forget. Right now, though, we move to the third coin, and the story it carries is one that speaks directly to the kind of man who's learned, through hard experience, that the details always matter. There are years that mean something, years that carry weight. Years that a man can point to and say, that was a turning point, that was when things changed, that was a moment that mattered beyond what most people recognized at the time. For the United States of America, 1976 was exactly that kind of year. It was the bicentennial, 200 years since a group of men who understood that real freedom requires real courage signed their names to a document that changed the trajectory of human history. 200 years of a nation built on the idea that a man's worth isn't determined by his birth, his title, or who his father happened to know. 200 years of an experiment that, for all its imperfections, produced the most powerful and most prosperous civilization the world has ever seen. And in that year, that specific, historically loaded, nationally significant year, the United States Mint was producing Lincoln cents by the hundreds of millions. Coins that would circulate through the hands of Americans celebrating 2 centuries of independence. Coins that would pass through cash registers and parking meters and piggy banks and coat pockets across a country that was, in that particular moment, pausing to reflect on what it had built and where it intended to go. Most of those coins did exactly what coins are supposed to do. They circulated. They wore down. They ended up in landfills or melted or lost in the cushions of couches that were thrown out decades ago. They did their job and they disappeared. But some of them didn't disappear. Some of them were set aside. Some of them, by accident or by intention, survived in conditions that preserve them for exactly the kind of examination we're conducting right now. And within that surviving population, A small number of 1976 Lincoln cents carry characteristics that separate them from every other coin produced that year in ways that the market recognizes with significant and documented financial value. Let's talk about what 1976 means in the specific context of Lincoln cent production. The Philadelphia Mint and the Denver Mint were both running at full capacity. The San Francisco Mint was producing proof sets for collectors, those specially made coins with mirror-like fields and frosted devices, packaged carefully and sold directly to people who understood that some coins were worth preserving from the moment they were made. The total mintage across facilities ran into the billions. Billions of pennies bearing the date 1976, the year America turned 200 years old. And the vast majority of them are worth a cent. That's the baseline. That's the starting point. Now here is where the story becomes what it needs to be for the man who's watching this and thinking seriously about what it means. The 1976 Lincoln cent, like every coin produced in volume by a mechanized mint, was subject to the full range of production variables that create errors, varieties, and anomalies. The dies wore down and were replaced. The presses ran at high speed under enormous pressure. The planchets, the blank metal discs that become coins, came in varying conditions. The quality control systems of the era were human systems, meaning they were fallible, meaning they missed things, meaning coins that should have been pulled from production made it through and entered circulation or ended up in rolls that went out to banks and from banks into the hands of ordinary Americans who had no idea what they were carrying. The double die varieties on 1976 Lincoln cents are well documented in the numismatic literature. These are not rumors. These are not the wishful thinking of collectors who want their coins to be worth more than they are. These are cataloged, photographed, studied, and graded varieties that the major authentication services recognize and certify. When you submit a 1976 penny to a professional grading service and it comes back designated as a double die variety, that designation is not given lightly. It's the result of examination by trained experts using calibrated equipment and comparison against established reference standards. The certification is the difference between a coin worth $1 and a coin worth a great deal more. But the 1976 penny carries an additional layer of significance that goes beyond the standard error and variety discussion, and it's connected directly to the bicentennial context. In 1976, the United States Mint made a conscious decision to mark the national anniversary across its coinage. The quarter, the half-dollar, and the dollar coin all received special bicentennial reverse designs, dual dates reading 1776 to 1976, paired with designs chosen through a national competition. The penny did not receive a bicentennial reverse. Lincoln's memorial on the back remained unchanged. And that decision, that deliberate choice to leave the cent alone while transforming the higher denominations, created a specific collector dynamic that has sustained interest in 1976 cents among serious numismatists for decades. Because the penny was the coin that didn't change. It was the coin that continued to carry the standard Lincoln Memorial reverse through the entire bicentennial year while every other denomination was celebrating. And that continuity, combined with the high-volume production and the error potential that comes with it, means that the 1976 Lincoln cent exists in a space that's simultaneously common and potentially extraordinary, depending entirely on what specific coin you're holding. Here's the dimension of this that experienced men understand better than younger ones, and it's a dimension that applies as much to life as it does to coins. Context changes value. The same object in the same physical condition in different contexts is worth different things. A skilled tradesman in a market that needs his trade is worth far more than the same tradesman in a market saturated with his skill. A piece of land in the path of development is worth far more than identical land in the wrong location. A 1976 Lincoln cent with a strong double die obverse, graded MS-66 read by a major grading service, with population report numbers showing it as among the finest known examples. That coin exists in a context that assigns it a value the face stamp number on its surface doesn't come close to reflecting. The men who build real wealth over a lifetime, and the men watching this are overwhelmingly men who've spent decades doing exactly that, understand this principle at a cellular level. They've lived it in their careers, in their businesses, in their investments, in their relationships. They know that the difference between ordinary and extraordinary is almost never about the fundamental nature of the thing itself. It's about condition, context, timing, and knowledge. A man who has all four of those working together doesn't need luck. He creates his own outcomes. So when we talk about the 1976 Lincoln cent, We're really talking about a coin that rewards the man who brings those four elements to the examination. Condition. Is the coin preserved in a way that reflects its original state? Context. Does it carry an error, a variety, a characteristic that places it outside the standard production population? Timing. Is the coin being offered in a market where serious collectors are actively competing for top examples? And knowledge. Does the man holding it understand what he has before he decides what to do with it? The answer to that last question is the one this video is built to address. Because knowledge is the only variable entirely within your control. Condition is fixed, the coin either survived well or it didn't. Context is fixed, the error either exists or it doesn't. Timing is partially within your control but partly dictated by the market. But knowledge is entirely yours. You choose whether to acquire it. You choose whether to apply it. And you choose whether to act on it when the opportunity presents itself. For the 1976 Lincoln cent specifically, here is what applied knowledge looks like in practice. You pull out your cents from the mid-70s. You separate the 1970 SIXS. You look at the obverse under magnification and you examine the date carefully. The numbers 1, 9, 7, and 6 should be clean, single impressions with sharp edges and no secondary image visible alongside them. You look at the lettering Liberty on the left, In God We Trust across the top. On a standard coin, those letters are singular and precise. On a double die, you'll see the secondary impression clearly, especially on the letters that fall in the area of strongest doubling. Then you examine the mint mark if present, the D for Denver, and you assess the overall surface of the coin for signs of original luster, for the cartwheel effect that appears on a mint state coin when you tilt it under a light source, for the absence of wear on the high points of Lincoln's portrait. What you're doing is a first-pass assessment. You're not making a final determination. That's what professional graders are for. You're making an informed observation that either moves the coin into the category of worth pursuing further or confirms that it's a standard example. That's the skill. That's what separates the man who finds the valuable coin from the man who spends it. And in 1976, the year America turned 200, some of the coins that came out of those mint presses were not standard examples. They were something more. They were errors that slipped through quality control during one of the most historically significant years in American coinage. They exist. They're findable. And the top examples of the 1976 Lincoln cent have sold for $55,000. $55,000. Stamped with the year that America celebrated its 200th birthday. Carrying Abraham Lincoln's profile on a coin that most people don't look at twice. $55,000. We are building toward a final number that is going to reframe the way you think about every penny you've ever owned. And we're not done yet. The fourth coin has a story that reaches back to one of the most turbulent periods in modern American history, and the coin that came out of that era carries marks that make it one of the most coveted small cents ever produced. There are periods in a nation's history that test everything, that strip away the comfortable assumptions and force a reckoning with what's real, what's durable, and what actually holds up under pressure. The late 1960s and early 1970s were exactly that kind of period for the United States. Vietnam was consuming the country's suns and its confidence simultaneously. Cities were burning. Campuses were erupting. The political landscape was fractured in ways that hadn't been seen since the Civil War. And through all of it, through every protest march and every evening news broadcast and every family dinner table argument about what America was and what it should be, the United States Mint kept running. The presses kept turning. The coins kept coming out. Because that's what a functioning economy requires. Regardless of what's happening at the level of history, regardless of the noise and the chaos and the uncertainty, commerce continues. Men go to work. Goods get bought and sold. Transactions happen. And every one of those transactions at the most basic level involves the coins that the mint produces, including the Lincoln cent, including, specifically in 1970, the Lincoln cent produced at the San Francisco Mint. The coin that carries the S-Mint mark. The coin that, in certain specific varieties and conditions, has become one of the most talked about and most financially significant Lincoln cents in the entire modern series. To understand why the 1970 South penny occupies the place it does in serious numismatic conversation, you need to understand what the San Francisco Mint was doing in 1970 and why its production is fundamentally different from what was coming out of Philadelphia and Denver. By 1970, San Francisco had largely transitioned away from producing coins for general circulation. Its primary function had shifted toward producing proof coins, the specially manufactured, specially handled, specially packaged coins made specifically for collectors. Proof coins are struck on specially prepared planchets using specially prepared dies, and they're struck multiple times at slower speeds to bring up the full sharpness of the design and create that distinctive mirror field, frosted device appearance that makes them immediately recognizable as something above and beyond a circulation coin. So when you're talking about a 1970 South Lincoln Center, you're almost certainly talking about a coin that was produced as part of a proof set, sold directly to collectors, and handled with at least some degree of care from the moment it left the mint. That baseline of intended preservation is part of why high-grade examples exist. It's not an accident that some 1970s pennies survived in exceptional condition. They were made to be preserved. They were purchased by people who understood they were buying something worth keeping. The question is whether the specific coin you're examining is merely a well-preserved proof, which has value but measured value, or whether it's something that stands above even the proof population in a way that commands serious collector attention. And the answer to that question, for the most valuable 1970s Lincoln cents, comes down to one of the most dramatic and well-documented double die varieties in the entire Lincoln Memorial Cent series. The 1970s double die obverse is not a subtle variety. It is not the kind of thing that requires expert-level knowledge to spot once you've seen a reference image. The doubling on this coin is strong, clear, and visible under modest magnification, and on the strongest examples it's visible to a trained naked eye. The date shows it most powerfully. The 1970, that 4-digit sequence, displays clear, separated doubling that is unmistakable once you know what you're looking for. The lettering follows. Liberty shows the doubling. In God We Trust shows the doubling. The entire obverse tells the same story, that the die used to produce this coin was itself produced with a significant misalignment that transferred directly to every coin it struck. Now here's what makes this specific variety so extraordinary in financial terms. You're combining three things that rarely occur together. First, a strong, dramatic, well-documented error variety that the market recognizes and values. Second, a coin that was produced as a proof, meaning the baseline quality of the strike and the planchet is already above what you'd find in a circulation coin. Third, the survival factor. Proof coins were preserved with more care than circulation coins, meaning high-grade examples of the 1970s double die exist in numbers that allow collectors to actually acquire them, while remaining rare enough that competition for the finest examples drives prices to levels that reflect genuine scarcity. That combination, dramatic variety, proof quality production, meaningful but not impossible rarity at high grades, is precisely the formula that creates the kind of numismatic value that gets documented at major auction houses and discussed in serious collector publications. This isn't a coin that's valuable because of rumors or because someone decided to inflate its importance. It's valuable because the evidence is there, the documentation is there, and the auction results are there for anyone willing to look at them honestly. But let's step back from the technical details for a moment and talk about something that the men watching this understand from their own experience in a way that younger men often don't yet. There's a difference between information and wisdom. Information is knowing that a 1970s double die penny exists and that it's valuable. Wisdom is understanding why it's valuable, what that value is built on, and what it means in the context of everything else you know about how markets work, how rarity works, and how human desire for the exceptional drives economic behavior. Wisdom is what turns information into action, and action into outcome. The men in the 35 to 65 plus range who are watching this video right now have something that no amount of research can substitute for. They have decades of pattern recognition built from real experience. They've seen markets move. They've seen things that were ignored become valuable and things that were overvalued collapse. They've learned, through experience that sometimes cost them something, that the fundamentals always matter more than the hype. And the fundamentals on the 1970 South Lincoln Center are as solid as fundamentals get in the world of small coins. Documented variety, professional authentication available, active collector demand, limited population at the highest grade levels, historical significance connected to a specific and meaningful period in American history. A production context, the San Francisco Proof Mint, that inherently limits the surviving population compared to the billions of circulation coins produced elsewhere. Every one of those fundamentals points in the same direction. This coin is real. Its value is real. And the men who find examples of it in old proof sets, in inherited collections, in the accumulated coin holdings that pass from one generation to the next, those men are holding something worth taking seriously. Here's the practical intelligence you need to actually do something with this information. Proof sets from 1970 are still findable. They were sold by the United States Mint directly to collectors at the time, and millions of American families who were interested in coins purchased them. They were stored in dresser drawers, in safe deposit boxes, in shoe boxes on closet shelves, in the kinds of places where careful men put things they consider worth keeping. When those families transition, when estates are settled, when houses are cleared, when the accumulated belongings of a lifetime get sorted through by the next generation, those proof sets surface. And the next generation, more often than not, has no idea what's in them. That's not a criticism of younger people. It's just the reality of how specialized knowledge works. You don't know what you haven't learned. A man who spent his working life as an engineer or a contractor or a business owner had neither the time nor the particular reason to become an expert in Lincoln cent varieties. But his son or daughter, sorting through his belongings, might hand you a 1970 proof set for $20 at an estate sale because they know it's old and they know it has coins in it, but they don't know specifically what they're looking at. The man who's watched this video knows what he's looking at. And that knowledge is worth something in the most direct and literal financial sense of the phrase. When you encounter a 1970 South Lincoln Center, whether it's in an original proof set or loose in a collection, here is your examination protocol. First, assess the overall appearance. A proof coin has a distinctive look. The field should be mirror-like, reflective enough to see your face in if the coin is in good condition. The devices, Lincoln's portrait, the lettering, the date should be sharp and well-defined. Then go directly to the date under magnification. On a standard 1970s proof penny, the date is clean and singular. On the double die variety, the date tells you immediately that something is different. The doubling is there or it isn't. If it's there, you don't need to second-guess yourself. You protect the coin and you get it authenticated. Do not clean it. Do not attempt to improve its appearance. Do not store it loose with other coins. The surface of a proof coin is extraordinarily sensitive to contact damage, and a hairline scratch from another coin can drop the grade, and therefore the value, significantly. A coin that grades PR67 Deep Cameo is worth dramatically more than the same coin graded PR64. The difference between those two grades might be a single careless moment of handling. Don't be the man who loses thousands of dollars because he didn't know to be careful. The 1970 South Lincoln Center with a strong double die obverse in top proof grades is a coin that has commanded $80,500 at documented auction point. $80,500. For a penny with an S Mint mark from San Francisco. For a coin produced during one of the most turbulent years in modern American history. For something that might be sitting right now in a proof set that someone inherited and hasn't examined. $80,500. That number will be waiting for you at the end of this video, sitting alongside the other four figures we've already built, and together they will tell a story about value, knowledge, and opportunity that is genuinely difficult to forget once you've heard it. One coin remains. And the story of the fifth coin, the last one, is in some ways the most powerful of all because it's the most recent, and because its lesson applies most directly to the world most of these men are living in right now. There's a particular kind of satisfaction that comes at the end of something built properly. Not rushed, not cut short, not padded with filler to make it seem like more than it is, but built the way a man who takes pride in his work builds things. Solidly, with attention to every component, with respect for the person on the other end who's going to use what you made. If you've stayed with this video from the beginning, you've invested your time and your attention, and what you're about to receive in return is the complete picture, the final coin, the final story, and then every number lined up together in a way that will reframe permanently how you think about the coins that have passed through your hands over the course of your lifetime. The fifth coin is the 1981 D Lincoln cent. And if the previous four coins carried stories rooted in turbulence, historical weight, and governmental experimentation, this one carries a different kind of story. A story about transition. About the end of one era and the beginning of another. About a change so fundamental to the nature of the American penny that most people who lived through it never noticed it happening. and about the coins produced right at the edge of that change that now occupy a specific and financially significant place in the numismatic record. To understand the 1981 D penny, you need to understand what was about to happen to the Lincoln cent. Because 1981 was the last full year that the United States Mint produced pennies in the traditional composition that had defined the coin for decades. The 95% copper, 5% zinc alloy that Americans had been carrying in their pockets since 1962 was about to be replaced. Starting in 1982, the penny's composition changed dramatically to a zinc core with only a thin copper plating on the outside. The reason was the same economic pressure we discussed in the context of the 1974 penny. Copper prices had risen to the point where the metal in a penny was worth more than the coin itself, and the government made the decision to fundamentally alter what a penny was made of. That change happened in 1982, which means that 1981, the year the Denver Mint produced the coins bearing the D Mint mark we're discussing today, was the last year of the old penny. The last year of the coin that had been, in its material composition, a consistent and genuine piece of copper currency. The last year before the penny became, at its core, a zinc coin wearing a copper costume. Men who were adults in 1981 lived through that transition without most of them ever registering it consciously. But the numismatic market registered it. Collectors registered it. And the significance of 1981 D Lincoln cents, particularly those produced with errors or preserved in exceptional condition, reflects that registration directly in their documented auction values. Now let's talk about the Denver Mint's operation in 1981 specifically, because the production context matters enormously for understanding where valuable coins come from. The Denver Mint was running high-volume production of Lincoln cents throughout 1981, feeding the enormous demand for small change that a functioning national economy generates continuously. The machinery was under pressure. The dies were being used hard. The quality control systems were the same human-dependent systems that had been in place for years, effective at catching obvious problems, but not infallible, and certainly not capable of catching every anomaly that a high-speed coin press operating at full capacity can produce. The error varieties that make 1981 D Lincoln cents worth serious examination fall into the same categories we've discussed throughout this video: double dies, off-center strikes, major planchet errors, die cap errors, coins struck on wrong planchets. But the 1981 D has some specific characteristics that are worth understanding in their own right. The double die varieties documented for this date show strong doubling on the obverse lettering and date that is clearly visible under 10-power magnification. The coins that carry these varieties in mint state condition, meaning they were never circulated, never spent, never handled the way circulation coins are handled, represent the overlap of error significance and preservation quality that defines maximum collector value. But there's another category of 1981 D cent that commands attention beyond the standard error varieties, and it connects directly to the transitional context we just established. In 1982, when the composition change happened, the Mint was producing both copper and zinc pennies simultaneously as the transition rolled out. There are documented cases of transitional error coins, coins struck on the wrong planchet type, that emerged from that production environment. The proximity of 1981 to that transition means that any anomalies in the metal composition of 1981 D cents are worth examining carefully. A coin that appears to be a 1981 D but has characteristics suggesting non-standard metal content is a coin that deserves professional examination, not casual dismissal. This is where the weight test becomes relevant, and it's one of the simplest and most accessible tools available to any man who wants to do a first-pass assessment of his older pennies. A standard copper cent from 1981 weighs 3.1 grams. A zinc cent from 1982 onward weighs 2.5 grams. A digital scale accurate to 1/10 of a gram costs less than $20 and is available everywhere. If you have a cent that dates to the transitional period and its weight doesn't match what it should be for its date, that anomaly is worth investigating further. This is not a complicated process. It requires a $20 scale, a coin, and the willingness to check. The men who make that $20 investment and take 5 minutes to weigh their transitional era cents are the men who either confirm they have standard coins or discover they have something that belongs in front of a professional numismatist. The broader lesson embedded in everything we've covered today, across all 5 coins, across 5 different years, 5 different production contexts, 5 different stories, is a lesson about the relationship between attention and reward. The world is full of things that are worth more than they appear to be. That's true of people, of opportunities, of investments, and yes, of coins. The man who moves through life at full speed, never pausing to examine what's actually in his hands, will consistently undervalue what he's carrying. The man who slows down, who develops the knowledge to see accurately, who applies that knowledge with the patience and discipline that real competence requires, that man finds things. That man creates outcomes that the inattentive man never accesses. Every coin we've discussed today was produced in massive quantities. None of them are rare in the absolute sense of the word. Millions of 1975 D pennies exist. Millions of 1974 pennies exist. Millions of 1976, 1970s, and 1981 D pennies exist. The rarity is not in the date. The rarity is in the specific combination of characteristics, error or variety, preservation quality, documentation, professional authentication, that elevates a specific example from the vast common population into the category of the genuinely exceptional. Finding that specific example requires knowledge. Protecting it requires knowledge. Understanding its value and navigating the market appropriately requires knowledge. Everything comes back to what you know and what you're willing to learn. The men watching this video are men who've built their knowledge base over decades of real-world experience. They understand value. They understand the difference between what something appears to be worth and what it actually is worth. They understand that the most important investments are investments in understanding, because understanding creates the foundation for every other kind of return. Take that same orientation, that same hard-won wisdom, and apply it to the coins that might be sitting in your collection, in your father's old belongings, in the jar on your kitchen counter, and you are bringing a genuinely powerful set of tools to a search that has produced documented, verified, extraordinary results for the men who approached it the same way. Now, here is what you came for. Here is the complete picture, all 5 coins, all 5 values, lined up together the way they deserve to be seen. The 1975 D Lincoln penny, produced in Denver during the year Vietnam ended and America was trying to find its footing again. A coin that most people have spent without a second glance, in the right condition with the right characteristics, has sold for $61,000. The 1974 Lincoln penny, produced during the year America's government was experimenting with aluminum, during the year copper economics forced a fundamental rethinking of what a penny should be, has sold for $60,000. The 1976 Lincoln penny, produced during the bicentennial year, the year America turned 200, the year the nation paused to look at what it had built, has sold for $55,000. The 1970s Lincoln penny, produced at the San Francisco Mint during one of the most turbulent and consequential years in modern American history, carrying a double die variety that is dramatic, documented, and unmistakable, has sold for $80,500. And the 1981 D Lincoln penny, produced in Denver during the last full year of the genuine copper cent, standing at the edge of a compositional transition that most Americans never noticed, has sold for $47,000. 5 pennies. 5 Lincoln cents. 5 coins bearing the face of the man who held this nation together during its most destructive internal conflict. 5 coins that most people would spend without hesitation, drop into a tip jar, or toss into a fountain and make a wish. Combined value at documented auction, $303,500. That is what knowledge looks like when it's applied to something the uninformed world considers worthless. That is what attention produces when it's directed by understanding. And that is why the man who takes the time to learn, who slows down, examines carefully, and acts on what he discovers, is always the man who finds what everyone else walked past. Go check your pennies.